Hey GMs, tabletop RPGs thrive on collaborative storytelling, but what happens when your players challenge the narrative? In this video, we are going to explore content design and the art of creating immersive, flexible storylines that adapt to players' choices. Let's get to it.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Welcome back everyone to Dungeon Brew. We are continuing our series on collaborative storytelling, and today we are going to be diving into content design. If you are ever wondering how you are going to keep your story engaging and flexible and immersive, especially when players start to veer off onto unexpected paths, this video is for you. So let's go ahead and jump in by exploring what content design is and why it's so essential to TTRPGs. Okay, what is content design? In simple terms, content design is crafting the framework of the story. It involves the quests, the NPCs, the backstories, the towns, all of the elements that hold the world together. But it is more than just world building. Content design also involves planning for the choices that the players will make to ensure that there is a story that is going to move forward no matter what they decide. It's about building a plot that adapts and evolves and keeps the players engaged even when they're insistent on breaking the game. I realize this might rub folks a little bit the wrong way, but hear me out with this, okay? When you think of content design, I like to think about mapping out the players' journeys. In fact, I've talked about a really good tool called Twine that I've used before in the past to help me accomplish this. There's some games by Telltale that illustrate this concept relatively well. It's a good comparison. So like The Wolf Among Us or The Walking Dead, they provide this type of opportunity where there's branching storylines where players can make choices that ultimately leads them back to the main plot. In a TTRPG, the principle is relatively the same, but you have more freedom. Players can deviate from whatever the planned story may be, and you can adapt that narrative on the fly, weaving their choices into this ongoing tale. That's kind of the magic of collaborative storytelling, is that it's alive, it's responsive, it allows you to allow everyone to kind of shape it at the gaming table. So your story may change drastically from what you agreed upon in those initial few sessions of the game, or even in session 0, to become something much more than what it is. But you're able to take information and bring it back to the main plot that is being essentially executed at the gaming table. So let's talk a little bit about how we handle those player choices and we make that a reality. It would be arrogant and rude to expect your players to always follow the story that you're telling and do exactly what you want them to do in every single gaming session, where they're really just pawns in your scheme, rolling the dice and following through with your exact session design. It should be expected that players are going to go off script and want to do their own things and explore the world in some regards to their own benefit, to have fun and enjoy the game. So they may decide not to rescue that princess, or they may decide to overthrow the government. As the game master, it's your job to adapt to their choices. You do not want to force them back into your original plotline. You want to be able to adjust the story to match whatever their decisions are. So there's a few ways that you might consider doing this. One of them that I have used frequently is that my players will skip a quest or skip a dungeon or just ignore it, which allows me to take that information and move it to another location so those key elements still exist and I don't have to recreate content that I've already created before. I can just repurpose it. The second thing that I might do, which leans on to what we talked about in the last video in this series, is leaning into my system design. It's recognizing that there are consequences that will ripple throughout the world. So if they disrupt some sort of element in the major quest line, let's say that they don't rescue that princess, there should be some sort of consequence that comes from that. Maybe she dies and maybe the king needs to hire again a mercenary group or other adventurers to come and track them down because he sees her death as a result of your hero's choice that they made within the game. So having natural occurring consequences that happen within the world is a great way to respond to the choices that players make. And then, of course, there is the option to choose a completely new path, sitting down with the players and collaborating together to build a story that feels organic and exciting for the characters that have been created within this world. There's a game that we are doing with John where Us as the players decided to just abandon the main quest line, get on a ship, and travel across the world. He was accommodating, but it didn't change the fact that certain things occurred that had a ripple effect across the world that did impact us, even though we were hundreds of miles away. So there is always that option. The real goal of the GM is to continue moving the story forward while maintaining a sense of agency with your players, because that is what makes a tabletop role-playing game so compelling. As a game master then, what do you need to be aware of? Well, if you've ever played a video game and you've seen poor content design, sometimes you run into bugs. Something where a quest cannot be completed and it just halts the game entirely because there's no way to move forward. The same type of concern can be found in ttrpgs. What happens if your players kill the main NPC that's giving them quests, or an NPC that holds all the valuable information? What contingency did you plan for in case this did occur? Do you have other NPCs that have the information, or is all lost? I hope you just didn't build one town, because if your players burn it down, then there's nowhere to go. No, the truth of it is that a ttrpg gives you the option to be flexible. You can always pivot, even if you have to introduce a new character to keep things moving along within the story. One other fault that I want to talk about here as well is ignoring your player character motivations. Make sure that there is something engaging about the story that falls back to the player characters themselves, so that you don't have disengagement occur. So good content design can also mean that you are taking their backstories, their motivations, what really gets them excited about the game, and interweaving it into the story that you have prepared for them to play every session. In order to keep your content design intact though, there are some tools and systems that you can utilize at your table to make sure that everything is being tracked and that you're not missing any pieces. And I want to start off by pointing out that you have several players around the table that can help you in this process. We've talked about this before, but I think it's very important to assign roles to the players as players around the table to make sure that nothing is missed. We oftentimes have several roles filled depending on the party size and what we feel is important for that particular campaign. So some ideas that I'm going to throw out at you are: 1, having a chronicler and a lore keeper, somebody that is going to track the story events, the quests, the NPCs, kind of keeping a running journal or dialogue of what is happening throughout the game. The second person is a mapper. Now, since we play online, this isn't as needed as it was when we used to sit around in person playing games, but having somebody keep a record even of explored locations, what was found there, notable things that were there at those locations, can be very helpful. A third person is a treasurer. This is a person that's making sure that there's an equal share among the party, and they're managing the party resources overall for anything that might be sold to a vendor when we get to town. We also oftentimes have a tactician, somebody that makes sure that everyone has a plan going into combat and knows what everyone's role is, so it's just not a willy-nilly free-for-all when you go into combat sessions. We also oftentimes have a quartermaster, which is making sure that loot is being divided equally among people. It's really frustrating when one person has all the magic items and they're hoarding everything and other folks aren't getting their fair share. And then we also sometimes have an overseer or a caller, someone who is essentially the spokesperson for the party to the GM when necessary to dictate what the party's goal is, what it is they want to accomplish, and letting the GM know when everybody is ready around the table to proceed and move forward because they finished their short rest, their long rest, their conversation, or their planning for what they want to accomplish next. As the game master, you want to have your own notes and log sheets as well in regards to what's occurring in the game. Now, you can fall back on your player character notes, which is why they keep all these things to make your job a little bit easier, but you want to keep your own record of things as well that is not privy to the player's eyes. We did talk last video about some tools that you'll be able to utilize in the system to make sure everything is balanced and that you're able to keep track of it. But in regards to other information, you want to keep track of the non-player characters and what their motivations are, and maybe how the PCs are interacting with those NPCs. You also want to keep track of locations, special events that are occurring in those locations, and maybe some world building notes about each one of them that is pertinent when the player characters travel through those locations. And then I think probably the most important piece is keeping track of unresolved plot threads. If there are certain events or happenings that are occurring that the player characters just aren't responding to or they don't care about, are there natural reroll real world consequences that you need to consider as a result of the player characters just ignoring them completely. And then this leads us to the last thing to think about keeping track of as the game master, and that is a contingency plan. I'll admit John is far better at this than I am. Sometimes I kind of invent things on the fly based on what I would believe would naturally happen as a result to player choices, but having several threads built out about what different paths your players may take in the course of the game can help you keeping things moving naturally without having to just pause the game and going back to the drawing board to figure out how you're going to respond to players. This, of course, is easier if you've played with the same group of people for a long period of time and kind of know where they lean toward in terms of their play style and the things that they enjoy. So building several different pathways of what might happen to give players choices and options, or at least being able to be responsive to them, can be very helpful as a game master. To wrap up, I want to say that when you've done content design well, you have created a world where players can come in and interact with NPCs and factions and visit towns and engage in quests and have some freedom to make choices in any of those situations with any of those people, and there is still a path forward no matter what they decide. It allows you to really sit down at the table with the players and collaboratively tell a story that has a destination, and it can be any destination that they choose. It is really the epitome of having a good tabletop role-playing game, so that you are not having that stuck quest feeling with nowhere to go and nothing to do. So that is what you are aiming to accomplish here with this information. I hope this has been helpful for you. I hope that you're enjoying the series, and if you are, please give us a like and a subscribe, and check out our Patreon, where we have plenty of resources for game masters like you. I'll see you all next time.
Dungeon Brew.